Carcassonne. Carcassonne has to be one of the games of the last decades, together with Settlers of Catan, that is responsible, at least in part, for the renaissance of board gaming that we're experiencing these days. It is one of those games that drew in new people or people that had been disenamored with board gaming for a while, and that has helped the hobby become what the hobby is today. Nevertheless, it is a game that I'm not that big of a fan of, but mainly maybe because I played it too much. For a while it was my wife's favorite game, and we just binged on that game. I'm a little burned out, maybe it's because of that. But I have nothing against the general idea, the general engine of laying down tiles to create configurations and patterns and scoring based on that. It's just something that I'm not big fan of. Maybe it's the scoring system, if it's a little too convoluted for what the game is. But again, I'm not against the idea. So I was not against the idea when I started looking into a game called Isle of Skye. I'd heard about this game simply because people were raving about it. I heard such good things about it. I was curious. And so it looked a little bit like Carcassonne, but it also looked different enough that I wanted to give it a try and see how it was. And I can tell, at least in that regard already, that this is not Carcassonne. You will see some familiar elements, but there is a lot of other stuff around it. It doesn't feel much like Carcassonne. It doesn't even feel like a Carcassonne variant. It is really much its own thing, built originally around a well-known engine, and there's nothing wrong with that. Dice rolling is a mechanics, and imagine how many games we have that have been built around that idea. Isle of Skye, you're building your own kingdom by exploring lands, which mechanically speaking is represented by adding tiles around your initial castles, and creating different engines that will deliver resources to you and that will generate victory points for you. Let me show how the game works. At the beginning of the game, you place this board in the middle of the table. The board has a turn track. The game has 6 turns, so if you're playing it with any number of allowed players but 5, if you're playing with 5, the game only lasts 5 turns, and you use the other side of the board, which is double-sided, and has a turn track with only 5 turns. Here you have the victory track, obviously. Here in this area you place 4 of these tiles, which are drawn randomly at the beginning of the game. The icons may seem confusing at first, but you'll get to learn them quite well. And they represent special scoring conditions for the present game. So only 4 of these will be used each game. Here I set up the game with 4 of those already, which means that the game has vast replayability because the scoring conditions will change enormously from game to game depending on which tiles are selected. Money may score, animals, whiskey, enclosed areas, combinations of elements, a lot of different things may score, and different combinations of things may score. For example, in this game, we will score by having animals adjacent to farms, by having naval superiority, that is player with the majority of ships, player that is second rank in there. Squares of 4 tiles, and we'll see what that means later. And then enclosed areas. This is a game where you place tiles on the board, Carcassonne style, but better than Carcassonne, to create landscapes. And when you create a piece of landscape, which can be a lake, a mountain, a valley, that is closed from all sides, and it is at least 3 tiles big, then you score 3 victory points. But again, only if the specific scoring condition is being used in that game. Also, not all scoring conditions are checked every turn. Look at the turn track, it tells you what scores when. At turn 1, at the end of turn 1, condition A scores, so early in the game you may want to have farms and animals. Then in second turn, condition B, then A and C, B and D, and then 3 of them score, DAC and DBC. So each of these will score only 3 times per game and not at the same time, which means early on pile up your animals around your farms. Later on worry more about the condition D, about creating sealed areas, closed areas, because that it will score, and the last turn the animals will not be important at all. Now each player also has a cute screen such as this one. And also each player starts with a tile representing their castle as a reminder of the basic income that they receive each turn, and with rows departing from the castle. You also have this token here, which is the discard token, and we'll talk about that in a second. At the beginning of each round, you receive income. You always receive a basic income of 1. Also, during the game, you will extend your net of tiles around your castles. You may have rows that lead to tiles producing whiskey. Hooray! And for each tile that contains whiskey, hooray, that also has a road that leads to your castle, because what's the point of having whiskey if you can't bring it to your castle and drink it? For each tile that contains whiskey and has a road that leads to your castle, you get an extra income. Also, later in the game, players that are behind will receive extra income based on the number of players that are in front of them. So they'll get that sort of like boost to allow them to stay in the game and maybe to come back and try to win the game. It may feel a little gamey, a little artificial, but think about it. You have probably played driving video games where your opponents start driving faster than you just because you passed them. So it is not that these balancing mechanics are unheard of. I've seen many of them in many games. So here's a little more explicit, if you will, but nothing radical. Now, at the beginning of each turn, you get your income. Then each player draws 3 terrain tiles from this generous bag of tiles. It's a huge bag of tiles. Great variety there. Each player draws 3 tiles, and then they put them face up in front of them and in front of their screen so that the players can see them. Then you put your screen by the tiles, and you have to imagine that the back of your screen is divided in 3 areas that are devoted to those tiles. So behind your screen, you're planning what you want to do with those tiles. One of them needs to be discarded, and you will indicate that by placing this symbol there. The other 2, you need to put money by them, and this is the amount of money by which you feel comfortable selling them. Suppose this one, I'm like, oh, I really want that one, so if somebody wants it, they'll have to pay me dearly. They will have to pay me 6 coins. This one, yeah, well, I like that too also, but I can't, for reasons that I explain later, I can't offer it for too high, so I'll say I can let it go for 2. Maybe I really want this one, so actually I'm offering this one for real cheap so that it's attractive and people will look at that tile rather than that one. Once every player has set up the back of their screen, players reveal their selections, and then in order players, starting with the first player, every player has a chance of buying exactly one of the tiles of the opponents that have been put out for sale. The discarded tiles need to be discarded and go back into the bag. The tiles, so I really want that from my opponent, so to buy that tile I simply pay them the amount of money that they're asking for. They get to keep their money, of course, and they also get the money that is paid to them, and the player that bought the tile simply gets the tile. Once every player has had a chance of buying a tile from an opponent, the tiles that are still in front of you, you keep, but you discard all of the money. Basically, you're buying them from yourself, I guess. I'm not sure what the thematic hook is here, but mechanically then it makes sense because you need to price things right. So you can't just ask for insane amounts of money if you want to protect a tile that you want to keep, because then you're wasting all that money. So the theme seems to be a little weak there, but I like the general idea that you have to really decide how much you want to keep a tile. To keep a tile, to make sure you keep a tile, it may cost you quite a lot. So after all is said and done, between the tiles that you have kept and paid for them directly into the bank and the tiles that you have acquired, there will be new tiles for you to place around your castle, When you're placing tiles around your castle, you're building a landscape, and you need to make sure that the terrain matches mountain with mountains, green areas with green areas, pastures with pastures, water with water, and so on and so forth. The roads, if you can create a road or connections, is better because, well, there's some victory conditions, some scoring conditions that require that. You can bring whiskey to your castle, but it's not essential. You can. This is a legal placement as long as the terrain is okay. The fact that there isn't a road connecting is fine. And this is pretty much how the game works, really. Oh, look at that. That's a legal placement. And this is how the game works, really. You will, turn after turn, get your income based on the situation on the board and the situation in the game, meaning the rankings in terms of victory points, draw tiles, offer tiles, sell and buy tiles, place down the tiles, and continue like this. And score, of course, at the end of a turn. You will score the victory conditions that apply to that turn, so different things will be valuable in different ways during the game. Continue like this until the end of the game. At the end of the game, you have around the final scoring, which is based on scrolls. Some tiles, such as that one, have scrolls that give you extra way of scoring points at the end of the game. Here there is a reference in the rulebook. So at the end of the game, for example, if I have that scroll on my board, which I do, hooray, I get to score a victory point for every 2 sheep. There are similar things that give you victory point for every 2 tiles with barrels of whiskey, ships, cattle, farm, things like that. Also, if the scroll that is on your board is within a completed area, so that is surrounded by terrain features from all directions, you get to score the scroll twice, or better, the scroll lands twice as many points as it would otherwise. Also, at the end of the game, money is worth points. You can convert 5 coins into a single victory point. You put together all of the victory points that you collected previously with the victory points that you pick up in the final scoring, and at that point, the player with the highest score is the winner of the game. As I said, the similarities with Carcassonne are very superficial, very passing in nature, mainly the aesthetics, really. Because then when it comes to scoring, when it comes to the way that the tiles are assigned, things work in a very different way, completely different. And I really like this idea of committing the money secretly. It does several things. First, as opposed to Carcassonne, which is so much about I'm gonna build a farm, then I'm gonna score later, and it's gonna get all sort of weird shapes, and I'm gonna get distracted. I don't remember exactly where my farm was supposed to. It keeps you involved in the moment. This idea of assigning prices to your tiles, you are right there. It's quick, the feedback is immediate, so it keeps me involved in the experience, but it still involves interesting decisions because I still need to price it right, not too low, not too high. Low, well, unless I really wanted to get the tile because I am protecting something else. But if there is a tile that I want to protect, then pricing becomes key because too much can be a problem too. So that idea of pricing gives me an interesting decision, which is not convoluted, is not cerebral. It's very visceral in a sense. I need to make such a price that will look right or that will look wrong without bankrupting me. I need to create that psychological effect, and it's right there. It's immediate. The feedback is immediate. It's a very interesting decision. Also, what I like is the fact that the pace of the game is very fast because in so many cases players are playing simultaneously. Players are deciding the prices to assign and which tiles to discard at the same time. Once players have their tiles, they can put them down simultaneously, and most likely you get a good sense of where you want to put your tiles. The one thing that is not simultaneous when you go around the table and players decide what they want to buy, but even in that case, it may be that a player has put down their screen and set up their prices. And since all tiles are visible and that the players are maybe still thinking about their prices, you're looking at them and say, ooh, I would really like that tile. The one piece of information that is added when it is your turn to make purchases, well, to choose whether or not to purchase a tile, the one new piece of information is the price. Well, no, wait a second, that price is insane. So I don't have to worry too much. I don't have to agonize on that too much. And maybe the tile that I was interested in, you decided to discard because you saw that the tile would probably very profitable for me. So there are interesting elements of decision that, however, do not take too long to elaborate, do not take too long to analyze, but remain interesting. They're not obvious. And you have, of course, to look ahead a little bit, because not everything scores and not everything is valuable at the same time in the same way as the values change given to the scoring system. All of these elements that have this thing in common, again, of being immediate, of being fast, of being interesting enough, having enough layers so that it doesn't feel obvious, but you do not have to agonize on them. You do not have to suffer analysis paralysis. The design encourages you to be involved with the design, to remain attentive and to consider all different options, but does not overwhelm you with too many options or too many levels of decision. It really hits a soft spot there. That's nice balance between being accessible and playable, and yet still at the same time having some depth and having levels of decisions that make it fun. It is also very fast, especially with the low number of players. If you're playing it as a play with your spouse game and players know what they're doing, you can probably knock out a game in like less than 30 minutes, easy. 20-30 minutes, easy. It just moves very smoothly. With more players, it will still take longer, but it is not a game that overstays its welcome. And also, if it takes a little longer, still it is a game that rewards you very often. You score often, you score in different ways. You care about money, but you do get money. You do not find yourself completely locked out of the game and completely behind. Even the money system is such that if you're a little behind, there is this nice negative loop that gives you more money, allows you to come back. So it is a game that, well, you do not have many rounds. In that sense, if you waste a round entirely, it's pretty bad. But it's not too unforgiving in the sense that if you price one thing too much, then you're left out of resources and you never come back. It is a little forgiving in that sense. It still rewards good planning. It still rewards looking ahead. It has about these balancing elements. It has, I find, a nice balance between the tactical and the strategic. Mind you, if you're playing a game that will last like 30 minutes, it's not like a grand strategy, but you still have this nice balance between seeing what's available right there and what you can purchase, and if there's a new opportunity that opened up of you placing a tile that allows you to score very profitably. So you have the tactical element of responding to new contingencies, but you also have a bit of a strategic element that, of course, pays off if you manage to build a certain engine of resources, to build a certain configuration that allows you to score as new scoring conditions open up, become available, or I should say they're available at the beginning of the game, but they become active and they score in round 3, round 4, etc., etc. It's a really good game. I really enjoy it. There have already been a couple of games that have retired Carcassonne. I still have Carcassonne in my collection just because I think, how can I call myself a respectable board gamer if I don't own it? If somebody asks me to play it, then I need to show that. Nothing else to show that I know it, to show that I respect the historical value that it has. Credit where credit is due. But when it comes to playing a game, I would feel much more excited to play this game than Carcassonne. When somebody wants to play this kind of game, there are just better options than Carcassonne. Cacao is a game that came out last year that also was very good and better than Carcassonne in my very humble opinion. Isle of Skye is definitely one such game. You have the general idea, you have this engine that is familiar to players by now, and you can even use it in fact to help casual gamers or non-gamers to make a transition towards more complex games. They have played Carcassonne and Settlers of Catan only. Well, you know what, friend? I have a game that kind of like Carcassonne, but you may be interested in. And all of a sudden, I'm playing a game which is much more complex, strategically and tactically, without being too complicated or more complicated. A game that has more interesting decisions because it takes into account the psychology and the interpersonal dynamics on the table much more. It has interesting decisions which are still immediate and do not take too long, but they're not too obvious, not too complex, not too obvious. Really a game about balance, about scoring in many different ways, but about balance again psychologically. a perfect intermediate depth of decisions without being, I would say, intermediate complexity. Still very low complexity, but it creates a situation that is gameplay-wise more interesting and more nuanced than you would expect from such a simple set of rules. Isle of Skye, from Chieftain to King, a very good game by Mayfair Games.